All right, we are in Romans chapter 4. We mentioned verse 15 last week. That's where we left off. Because the law brings about wrath, for where there is no law, there is no transgression. And in mentioning in that all law can do is bring wrath. That's all it does. The law does not reward behavior that follows the law. Law punishes the behavior that goes against the law. That's all it can do. And it takes something outside of the law, beyond the law, not something that's lawless, but it takes something beyond the law to bring about mercy, to bring about salvation. That's what it took. And it was not, in this discussion, he's talking about, yes, in verse 15, he's talking about law as what law does, what law is. But specifically what he's been talking about happens to be the law of Moses, that you cannot cling to the law of Moses and think that you're going to be okay. Not anymore. In the past, yes, but that has been legitimately closed by God and fulfilled by Christ, and it is no more. Now, verse 16. Therefore, it is of faith that it might be according to grace. So it's not a matter of following that law and continuing in that law. There is a faith that you follow God. And of course, God set that law, and God closed that law, and Christ opens up another law at his death. There is the new covenant, or the New Testament. Then we are by faith to follow the promises of God. Well, what are those promises? The promises were that of the Messiah, that of salvation, that of heaven, and of the church. And there are numerous promises that are all fulfilled in Christ. There's numerous ones. But it's according to grace that's not found in the law of Moses. The law of Moses, while one can have grace in the eyes of God in the Old Testament, such as Noah, going all the way back to Genesis, there is the grace of God back then. And of course, Noah is obedient to God. He is faithful to him. But this is, we'll just read it again, therefore, it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all the seed. Notice, not only to those who are of the law, but also those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. Now, what does that mean, the father of us all? Abraham is not the father of us all. One can clearly see Noah is the father of everyone this side of the flood. Adam is of everyone from the beginning until now. But Abraham is not. He's not the genetic father of us all. But what Paul is writing in this book is that Abraham is the father of the faithful who are following his faith. They share the same spiritual characteristics as Abraham. And someone can be truly a direct descendant of Abraham, but not share those characteristics because they simply do not have the faith that they're supposed to have. They don't have the faith that Abraham had. But notice he says, not only to those who are of the law, that is the law of Moses, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. Now, we go back to the whole discussion of what benefit did being Jewish have? What was the benefit of the Jewish nation? They had the oracles of God, and we discussed this, I don't know how many weeks ago. They had the oracles of God. The Gentiles did not have that. While there are prophets sent to the Gentiles and messages given to the Gentiles, and we made mention this a few weeks ago of Jonah is obviously sent to the Gentiles. He's sent to Nineveh. He's not sent to the Jews in Nineveh. He's sent to Nineveh itself. Daniel is a prophet of God, and he's off in the Babylonian court, and then later in the Medo-Persian court. Now, we have here, but those who are of faith, who are of the faith of Abraham. This would be anybody else, not just those who are of the law of Moses, but to anyone else who had that faith. Have there been Gentiles who had that kind of faith? And the answer to that is yes, there have been. You have the wise men at the birth of Christ. They see the sign of the birth of Christ. You have the wise men from the east. It doesn't say that they were Jews from the east, but it says they were wise men from the east, and they see a sign, and they know it's a sign of the King of the Jews. And they know what that means. They don't go to Herod to say, we know you're the King of the Jews because you've been appointed that. That's not what they're after. They don't care a thing about that. They know what the prophets said. Well, you also have Cornelius. Cornelius is one who had faith in God. Cornelius was Gentile. And you have others, whether you find them in Ephesus, or you find them in Athens, or you find them in Corinth, or you find them in Rome, you would have Gentiles who readily accept, by faith, readily accept that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. There's plenty of examples in that. There were, in all those places that I just said, whether it was Corinth or Ephesus or Athens, there would be Jews there as well that would accept as well. They would be there. But you had Gentiles who also believed. Now, this is outside of the law of Moses, because this is a discussion between, it's the thesis of the book. It goes right back to chapter 1, verse 16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for this power of God to salvation to the Jew first and also for the Greek. Okay? So that's the thesis of the book, that the salvation that is brought to man is not just for one or the other, but it's for Jew and Gentile both. It's for everybody. And that here is those that are of the law now going to Christ, as was by design. You have those who are not under that law of Moses. They too are following Christ because they hear and they believe. They believe it. And it is where things are brought down logically and put down of where this makes sense. This makes sense. Now, from a Gentile point of view, you did have plenty of Gentiles who, and it's not just one or two, but actually there were plenty, as I have become aware in the ancient past, that they began to question the validity of the gods that everyone happened to be worshiping. Whether it happened to be the Greek gods or the Roman gods, which were basically a Xerox copy. It's just a Latinized version of the Greek gods. Or whether it's the Egyptians, or whether the Egyptian gods, or whomever. That there were those who began to question it because it didn't make any sense. That one is that those gods didn't seem to be interested in mankind, but mankind certainly in a world where there seems to be a lot of design made for mankind. Food and water and air and basic comforts that can be found. All that just went against what those gods that they were worshiping. It didn't seem to match their character, that they wouldn't be interested whatsoever in mankind. Matter of fact, it's like with Prometheus. Prometheus is punished by the gods and this is Greek mythology, he's punished because he shows kindness to mankind by showing them fire. Okay, and he's not punished a little. It's a horrid thing that he has to go through. Okay, well, it's all story. Now, what I'm getting about in all this is that there were those that of the Gentiles, that when they heard the gospel and everything about it. Now, it can't just start off with there's a Messiah, the Christ, and he's the Son of God. And now believe, it's got to be more than that. It's got to be much more than that. And there is much more than that, of going all the way back into the beginning and showing this is what was spoken all the way back. And here it is fulfilled in the life of Jesus of Nazareth, and he is the Messiah. He is the salvation for all mankind, and there were Gentiles who immediately or soon thereafter followed Christ. Now, let's look at verse 17. We have a parenthetical statement. We'll get to that parenthetical statement in just a second. I want us to read 16 and 17 without that parenthetical statement. Therefore it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all, in the presence of him whom he believed. Well, who's the him? The him is God. In the presence of God whom Abraham believed. Okay? Now, here is the Abraham who's the father of us all, in the presence of God whom Abraham believed. And then we have this a dash, we have a hyphen, God. All right, showing that he believed, this is who he believed, God. Now, we need to read the parenthetical statement now because it's going to go into the last part of this verse. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. Now, he says in verse 16, who is the father of all? Then, parenthetically, he says, as it is written, I have made you the father of many nations. This goes to Genesis chapter 17, 4. Now, what we could go back to Genesis 17, 4 and not know anything of what Romans has said or taught, and think that this means just physical nations only. That this is just, yes, he's going to be the father of the Jewish people and also the father of other nations as well, which that is true. That is true. But it goes beyond that. He is the father of all the faithful. Not the physical father, but holding those who hold the same characteristics of faith that he had, show themselves to be a child of Abraham, where they're showing his faith. Now, he said, I have made you a father of many nations. Genesis 17:4. And notice the verb in this. I have made you a father of many nations. Okay, when he says this in Genesis 17, Abraham Isaac is not born. Isaac is not born. Isaac does not exist in Genesis 17:4. But he says, I have made you. That's past tense. I've done this. I've made you a father of many nations. Now we come to the end of this, where he says, you have God who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. He can speak of Abraham as the father of many nations centuries before it occurs. He can speak of the death of the Messiah and salvation to all. Salvation presented to everyone. Centuries before it happens, but speak of it as though it has occurred. Speak of it as in the past tense, that this has happened. This has occurred. Let's just we can simply go to places like, first, let's just go to Psalm 110 and verse 1. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. And in verse 4, the Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Now, Psalm 110 is a psalm of David. David lived around 900 BC, thereabouts. That's a good approximation. Around 900 BC. That's 900 years, a little more, before these things would occur. Before the Lord of David would be sitting at the right hand of God, before that Lord, the one that David calls Lord, would be a priest after the order of Melchizedek. He can't, while David is writing this, in the period that David is writing this, the Christ cannot be a priest according to the order of Melchizedek, because he hasn't come yet. He's not here yet. It hasn't happened yet. But God can speak of it so certainly that it has happened. I should say, as though it has happened. We'll discuss a little bit more about that in just a second, but let's go to Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against His anointed. Now, we just skip on down to verse 6. Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. That is Jehovah saying that He has done it. Now, the events of Psalm 2 won't occur until we get to the life of Jesus of Nazareth on this earth. Once again, Psalm 2 is a psalm of David. While Psalm 2 doesn't say that, Acts 4 does attribute it to David. David living still around 900 BC, sometime around at that point, speaking of these things as though they've already happened. Now, how can God do this? One, it's by way of His promises. That, while I can make a promise to you, of saying that, next year I will do such and such a thing. But that's always with the understanding of, I might not live to that point. It's always with that understanding. Or that something can occur to where, I'm incapable of doing it, whether physically incapable or whatever, that I cannot do that anymore. With God, He doesn't have those limitations. First off, He does not have the same limitations as us. When He says He's going to do something, He will do it. He can do it, and if He promised to do it, He will do it. But there's another part in this that's a little bit deeper, just by a little bit, but we can comprehend it, is that God is, just like God is not limited in space, He can be anywhere He wants to be. He can be everywhere. That's what omnipresent means. He can be everywhere. But He's also, as He can be in space, so He can be in time. He can be at any point in time simultaneously, from eternity to eternity, from everlasting to everlasting. He can be at every single second throughout it all simultaneously, to where, as He is inspiring David to write things such as Psalm 2 and Psalm 110, or speaking considerably earlier to to Abraham in Genesis chapter 17, speaking these things to him as though they have already happened, because while he is speaking to them, he's also where, at that point in time, where it has happened. He's there as well. He's in all those places. While we travel through time one moment after another, and we cannot back up, nor can we fast forward. God is through it all, through that entire timeline. He's at every, I'd say second, but every millisecond, and whatever's smaller than a millisecond. He's in all of those places simultaneously. And so he can address these things with full assurance. And here is the thing of having faith in him, is that yes, he knows, and if he says he's going to do it, actually, if he says he's done it, he's done it. And it's just a matter of getting through time to see it occur. For us, for him, it's already been accomplished. But for us, we have to go through time to see it. Now, let's just look at this again. Okay. As it is written, verse 17, I have made you a father of many nations. That's Genesis 17:4. He goes back there in the presence of him whom he believed, okay, God, who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. All right? And understanding that I have made is past tense of this has already been done. Now, we're continuing in a section here in Romans, written by Paul, a section here of where Paul is using the facts of Genesis to reason from those scriptures and having an understanding of many, many things. One, having an understanding concerning faith and concerning that of the law of Moses, and concerning Abraham and what occurred in the life of Abraham and at what points these things occurred, and it matters. All right? He's also using Abraham, reasoning also from Abraham as an example. The Bible clearly knows how it's teaching. It's not arbitrary. It's not just like some false prophet might put a few things down and then put a few other things down and a few other things down and have no idea really from moment to moment where they're headed with this. They're just doing it. And it's like with the Quran. The Quran seems to be really pointless or I should say helpless in actually teaching anybody much of anything. Because it was never in Muhammad's life. Muhammad didn't care what occurred after he was gone. He didn't care. He had done his con game. He didn't care what happened after that. Disbelieve him? He wouldn't care. It's over. He's done his little game. He's become his little warlord. He's gotten to loot and to kill and do the things that he wanted to do, and it's done. He didn't care what happened after that. Of course, he didn't write it, nor did he really intend for it to be written anyway. He had followers that did. And with the Quran, Quran's just a confused and confusing book. And you have really no idea who it's talking to, the context of it all, or what it means to you. What it means at all. It needs outside help. The Bible does not. The Bible knows how to interpret the Bible. The Bible knows what was taught previously or what will be taught later, and knows how to use it powerfully. And what Romans is about to do is to use the example of Abraham. It's already been using the example of Abraham, but using this example. Okay, verse 18. Who, contrary to hope, it's talking about Abraham, who, contrary to hope, in hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations according to what was spoken, so shall your descendants be. Now that's Genesis 15:5. All right, so shall your descendants be. That was when he takes Abraham. Well, it's not as though he took him anywhere, but showed Abraham the night sky. Look at the night sky. All right, number the stars. Number them. And when I was a kid, I grew up in a town where there was light pollution. I didn't even know what that meant, light pollution. I thought as a kid, given enough time, I could number the stars. Because there weren't that many. With light pollution, there's just not that many. Because I can 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, 5, 6, 7, all right, 8, 9. Oh, there's a small one right there. I got that one. I thought that I could do it. But it was only when I happened to be out with some friends. We were walking around at night, and there was a blackout. Just suddenly, there's a clear sky. Suddenly there's a blackout, and all of a sudden, all the stars were visible to me. Or, we'll just say, billions of stars were suddenly visible to me that I did not know were out there. I simply did not know, because they were obscured by city lights. They were obscured by it. Now, he shows Abraham the stars. Of course, Abraham has seen the stars before, and he says, number them. Well, Abraham cannot number them. He says, so shall your descendants be. It's going to be that numerous. You cannot count them. And yeah, you can't count them. You can't count them at all. And if these promises didn't come about, well, first off, we probably wouldn't know who Abraham was anyway if these promises didn't come about. And all of this would have just died with Abraham, this whole knowledge, and that God is not involved in this, that all of this is just something that occurred with Abraham. If the promises did not occur, then it would be easily proven they didn't occur. But they did occur, and they're easily proven to have occurred. Easily proven. Matter of fact, I think with most people who will give at least a second to think about it, that they would have to admit, this in fact did occur. Okay, we got to give the Bible at least that one. Yeah, it did. At least that one did occur. Okay, now we come to this. Let's look back at the beginning of verse 18. Who contrary to hope. Well, what does that mean? Contrary to hope. And then it says, in hope believed. Who contrary to hope. That means that the natural condition that was Abraham at the time and Sarah, his wife, at the time, that it would seem impossible. It would seem impossible that they could have a child. Contrary to hope, according to current conditions, according to their health, that it would seem impossible for this to happen. But Abraham understood it's not impossible for God. Well, we have to ask, how is it that a God who can speak things into being, light being the first that we see on day one, and then able to speak things into existence, and then the natural realm is created in a matter of 6 days. And then on the 6th day you have human life, Adam and Eve, and all the other living things, from plants and animals to those things that fly in the air, those things that swim in the sea. All these things brought about in existence. How is it that the one who created all of that and all of us cannot fulfill this promise to Abraham? How could that be? It's that he has the power to do all this, but he cannot possibly have an old man and an old woman cannot bring it about that they can have a baby. Well, of course he can. Of course he can do it. He can do what he can resurrect from the dead. He can do whatever it is that is inside his will to do. Obviously, that was inside his will to do. And so Abraham believed that. Now, if we look at some others, such as Naaman. Naaman has leprosy. Naaman's not Jewish. Naaman is actually Syrian. And he has leprosy. He goes to seek the prophet of God in the hopes that the prophet of God in Israel could help him. And Elisha is there. But he never sees Elisha. Elisha just sends out a messenger, one of his, Ugazi, I think is his name, that goes out to tell him what he has to do. And it is dip 7 times in the Jordan. Yeah, that's simple. That's simple. But he thinks there ought to be something more fantastic about it than just that. There's got to be something greater, well, not greater, but something that seems like something great's happening. Dipping 7 times in the Jordan seems like nothing. Well, he didn't ask him to do the impossible. He asked him to do something that was very possible. Go do it. And for a moment, he is angry and does not want to do it. Something as simple as that. So you come down here all the way to visit this prophet of God. Visit Elisha. He tells you what to do. And because it's too simple, you won't do it. That doesn't make any sense at all, and that's what his servant tells him. This doesn't make any sense at all. If he told you to do some great thing, you would have done it. But how much more something simple? Just go ahead and do it. Well, there's the faith. Faith that God can do it. Or in hope, well, actually, just going contrary to hope, in hope believed. Contrary to hope, that it seems impossible, but I know that God can do it. Therefore, I believe God. It seems impossible and there are so many things like this today of where people have no faith in God. Some have zero faith. They have zero faith of where they don't believe that there is a God. Or at least they want to have you believe that they don't believe there's a God. They don't believe there's deity. And with some, I guess they do. And that he cannot create as he wants to create, and in the time that he wants to create it, that he cannot do the things that he says he can do, and that his word clearly says he can do and has done, that they don't want to believe any of those things. They don't want to believe that, yes, Moses and Israel crossed on dry land going through the Red Sea. They don't want to believe that. They don't want to believe that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. They don't want to believe that. Faith says, yes, God created in 6 days because he said he did. Who am I to doubt him? And who am I to put some kind of other motive there that he wouldn't want to tell us the truth? Who am I to say, no, that didn't happen that way, and here's why he tells us it did happen that way? Okay, that's called a lie. And I had this discussion years ago with someone that said, yes, it says 6 days, but that he only says it's 6 days because he doesn't want us worshiping monkeys. Well, that doesn't even make sense. That doesn't even make sense. But the fact of the matter is, who am I to put any kind of motive on God to where he would lie to us? He doesn't lie to us. He tells us the truth. So believing the 6 days of creation, that's having faith in God. Believing that Moses and Israel, escaping Egypt, went across on dry land through the Red Sea, and that the Egyptian army is caught under just this enormous collision of two sides of the Red Sea coming back together, which would have been catastrophic. There's no escaping that. There'd be so much water pressure just instantly that I don't think you would have survived very many seconds in that one. Or that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. All of these things would seem impossible, and for us and for nature, it is impossible. But for God, none of it is impossible. And if He says He did it, He did it. And if He says there's something that He's going to do, and even is speaking about it as though He's already done it, we can take it by faith. We can take it by faith that that's exactly what He's done. Now, verse 19, and not being weak in faith, he did not, this is Abraham, not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead. Now that's figurative, but here in parenthetical statement, since he was about 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's womb. Well, she was 90 years old. He's 100, she's 90. And here would be this consideration of I have seen more days than what's ahead of me on this earth. I have more behind me than what's ahead of me. That I'm coming to the end here. 100 years old, I'm coming to the end in all of this. But he does not consider that as being a problem for God, because it's not. His age and Sarah's age don't enter into it. That doesn't enter into it. It's whether God can bring this about or not. That's at issue. It doesn't matter what the conditions are with him or with her. God can bring this about. Now, verse 20. He did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God. Abraham was not double-minded. He was not double-minded. He came to the conclusion God could do this, and he held on to it. When you have come to the conclusion of the truth, you don't need to waver in any of that. You don't need to waver at all. When you've come to the conclusion of the truth, and the truth is that God will keep His promises, and God has the power to keep His promises. When you come to that truth, then there's no need to rethink it. There's no need to rethink that at all. That this is a strong faith in God. That here is the conclusion, and it's a logical one. Here's the conclusion, and God can bring this about. That's precisely the type of faith He wants out of us. The faith that Abraham had is the faith that He expects all of us to share. All of us to have that same type of faith. Believing that, like there's simple things, very simple things. I remember being in a class, and it was a discussion of the plagues. It was going one by one through the plagues that were in Exodus in Egypt. And we were on the point of hail and fire coming from the sky. Okay, and there was a man in the class that he could accept the hail, but he couldn't accept the fire. And he had to make an excuse for the fire. He felt that it was necessary to make an excuse for the fire. That it was hail, but not fire. Okay, what does the text say? And if it was something other than fire, I think the text would tell us. Or if there was nothing like fire, it wouldn't mention fire. What's happening to your faith? Hail is possible. Fire from heaven is impossible. That doesn't even make sense. Well, what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? Yeah, that wasn't hail, that was fire and brimstone coming from heaven. That's not some fire that got out of control starting from Sodom and spread to Gomorrah. This is God raining down fire and brimstone. Or, later on in Exodus, raining hail and fire onto Egypt. You either believe it or you don't believe it. All right, you choose. You choose. But the fact of the matter is, God can produce amazing things, yes, that go against nature itself, or what we would expect nature to do. He has full control over that. Jesus can walk on water. He can stop storms. He can raise the dead. He can heal the sick. Blind now see, the deaf now hear, the mute now speak, the lame now walk. He did every single one of those, and it is a matter of faith and understanding. It's a matter of faith that says, yes, I believe He did all those things. I believe He did every single one of those things. And that is going to help you. That's going to help you in the rest of your life. Why? Because if I believe God here, then I'm going to believe God in my life. I'm going to believe that He can help me when He tells me to do certain things, and it seems like that might be painful, and I might never recover from that, and that might be the thing that actually brings about a lot of bad in my life. Well, sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. When God has told us there are certain things we must do, it's a matter of faith of doing them. Even when it seems like, from a financial point of view, that may be a terrible idea. Quitting a good-paying job because it is requiring you to sin. Well, what would Christ expect out of that? You quit that job. Will He take care of you? Yes, He will. Will you have as great of a salary or better if you do? There's no guarantee in that. There's no guarantee in that, but you will be better off. You will be better off, and He will take care of you. He'll take care of me. He will take care of you. And it's a matter of faith doing that. That's why we have Abraham being brought up as an example, because he is called to leave Ur. From a financial standpoint, that could have been devastating. And most certainly from a standpoint of basic creature comforts, that would have changed things entirely. You think Abraham didn't have a house, didn't have a roof over his head? Of course he did. He didn't have beds that were, basically in the same place every night? Yeah, of course he did. But now he's going to be moving because God called him to do that. He's going to be living in tents from there on out and have no place to call his home. No place. He has a place to bury his dead and where he'll be buried, but that's it. That's the only land he's really going to own. And thank you everybody for being here with us this morning, and hopefully we will continue this and with these lessons on the book of Romans.